often cite Metal Gear Solid as one of my two favorite video game franchises, right up there with The Legend of Zelda. I think the PS1 original is a classic and pushed video game storytelling forward. I think Metal Gear Solid 2 is just as amazing and has a story that actually lands harder today than it did in 2001 when it was released. I think Metal Gear Solid 3 is the epitome of the traditional Metal Gear gameplay style and has a storyline that was a little more grounded but had intense emotional moments from start to finish. If we skip to Metal Gear Solid 5, I think that's a brilliant game wrapped in an awkward, incomplete story, but remains uniquely brilliant. Which brings us back to Metal Gear Solid 4, the first game in the series on the PlayStation 3, and I played this back when it was released, and I remember having very high highs and pretty low lows during my playthrough. Playing through it again a decade later, I think that memory is pretty accurate, but I also think that time has softened my memories of just how low the lows are in this game. So let's talk about it. More than anything, I think Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots, is an artifact of its time. The game came out in 2008 in the first half of the PS3, Xbox 360 generation of consoles. This was the Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Gears of War generation, when everything was trying to be quote-unquote gritty. What this really amounted to was a ton of games with boring brown color schemes. I remember this felt right at the time, but playing the game again in 2019, it's really hard to feel anything but that the design has aged kinda poorly. This part of the video only covers the first 2 chapters of the game, and there is a chance that in the second half of the game, it'll add more distinctive environments, but as far as introductions go, this is a big downgrade from the snowy helipad of Shadow Moses from Metal Gear Solid 1, the tanker mission from Metal Gear Solid 2, and the jungle of Metal Gear Solid 3. Beyond the visual design of the game itself also has a rough go of it early on. The Metal Gear series has always had controls that are a little out of the range of normal, but none of the other games in the series had me take so much time to come to terms simply with navigating the world. This was the first Metal Gear Solid game with full camera control, if you don't count the Subsistence release of MGS3, and the game looks like it's similar to the million other third-person shooters you know and love. But Solid Snake has very weird controls still. For one, he completely lacks momentum, so lots of animations look stilted. You kind of go from full speed to just stopped in a heartbeat, which is a little weird. But at the same time, first-person and aiming modes have this weird accelerating movement that MGS2 and 3 had, which makes aiming just more difficult than it should be when you're in kind of an over-the-shoulder or first-person view. This is a stealth game, of course, so in theory this isn't the worst thing, since you'll spend most of your time sneaking around the world, but even this is not something you can rely on in this game. Right from the word go, you are thrown into a battlefield, and frankly, you have to literally be Solid Snake himself to get through this area on your first playthrough without needing to kill dozens of people. The problem is partially the controls, which made me feel like I wasn't in as full control over my character as I'd like, but it's also that there are soldiers on 2 sides of the fight, and you're friendly with one and fighting against the other. The problem is that it's not always easy to tell who is who, since everyone is wearing the same sort of brown outfit on a brown background, so you're inevitably going to walk into someone you shouldn't, and a fight is going to start. I did start getting more adept at sneaking around near the end of the second chapter, but I really felt like I was stumbling my way through the game up to that point. And even if you do masterfully figure out how to always fight for the right side, you're still going to have plenty of situations where you simply can't do anything besides shoot your way out of them. I'm all for games evolving over time and changing what they expect from you from game to game, but I don't think this game is built to be either a satisfying shooter nor a gratifying stealth game. There are moments that are enjoyable, but so far the game doesn't have enough of these to really win me over. Oh, and can I just say how befuddling the weapon selection in this game is? There are like 8 different versions of every gun, and they're all effectively the same. The stats show some differences here and there, but I didn't find them to make a meaningful difference in the actual game. I basically stuck with what I had and got along fine. Again, I'm okay with game series changing over time, but I think back to games like Sons of Liberty or the original Metal Gear Solid, and I can name most of those weapons from memory alone to this day. In this game, the guns all blended together for me and made me not really care about any of them. On a more positive note, I think that the visuals have held up quite well over the past 11 years. This clearly isn't a current generation game, but lots of elements such as character models, animations, environmental details, and depth of field work pretty well. This feels like a huge leap from previous games in the series, and all of it still looks pretty good considering when they were released. The camera work makes sure you notice these details too, as it likes to zoom in on all sorts of things from guns to faces to make sure you appreciate how much detail they've crammed into the game. Texture work is not quite as strong, and things like physically based rendering hadn't really been mainstreamed yet, and you'll notice the game's age more there, but it's overall a very impressive package. And the cutscene direction is a welcome update from previous games as well. In line with the more realistic, but also often bland, setting and art style, the camera work in cinematics has also seen a tonal shift. Much of this game is shot handheld and feels much more like a Paul Greengrass film than anything before in the series. There are cool moments like when you're breaking into a building, Snake is in front of the camera, clearing rooms as he goes, and the cameraman is behind him, keeping Snake mostly in frame, but also breaking off him a few times just to check the surroundings himself. There are also moments where you can click the X button to see flashbacks to other games when a character brings up old events, as well as times where you can hold down L1 to see the world from Snake's perspective for a couple seconds. You never have to do these, but they can give you a bit of a nostalgia trip or a little extra information. For example, I looked in first person during a conversation with Naomi and saw the next boss skulking around outside for a moment. It didn't change the game at all, but I did get a little more info and I felt a little bit more like Snake. Now, this is a Metal Gear game, so the story is a major part of your enjoyment here. Sadly, these two chapters have been Metal Gear at its worst. And again, I say this as a huge fan of the series. I'd forgotten about the fake TV shows you watch for the first 5 minutes of the game. There's about a half dozen live-action shows you can click through and see everything from action movies to a horrifying cooking show to an interview with none other than David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake. It's a weird start, and I guess all of it is supposed to live in the reality of the game, but I just kind of dig all of it. It's weird, it's silly, but I'm really into it. Then the game proper starts up with a cinematic showing Snake riding in a truck through a nondescript but vaguely Middle Eastern war zone. Snake's monologue is decent, and I never tire of hearing David Hayter in the role of Solid Snake, but this is about where the goodness ends. Much of the rest of these chapters is forgettable. And the things that stick out to me only stick out for being particularly rough. I'm very much not a fan of what they did with Rose and Jack after a pretty great ending in Metal Gear Solid 2. Rose being married to the Colonel and Jack being off God knows where didn't feel earned. I thought those two were the emotional core of the game, and this direction cheapens the ending of MGS2 for me. And I'll say it again, I'm completely on board with writers doing things with characters that I didn't expect or hope to happen, but I don't think the writing here earns this drastic change in character. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The game has more fart jokes in the first hour than maybe any other game I've played in my entire life combined, minus maybe Conker's Bad Fur Day. There's a smoking monkey that I think is supposed to be endearing, but is really just kind of cringy. There's a character who is in an elite squad of soldiers who appears to be completely incompetent and again has raging diarrhea every moment of the game. Drebin, a mysterious character who exists exclusively to dispense exposition and service the game's economy, is someone I think Kojima wants us to think is super cool, but is really just kind of boring. And then there are the many, many shots of female characters that explicitly zoom in and focus on their chests. It just doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't fit with the tone of the rest of the game. It's just something that made me roll my eyes over and over again when it happened. And then there's the Beauty and the Beast core, your 4 main bosses in the game. This is a staple of the Metal Gear Solid series, following the Sons of Big Boss, Dead Cell, and Cobra Unit from the last 3 games. And sadly, this group of baddies is the least interesting of the bunch. I've only squared off against Laughing Octopus so far, and while she is a creepy character with an admittedly fun boss fight, her story is completely bungled. Her backstory is compelling and tragic, but the game doesn't let her tell her story, nor does Snake learn it in any way that's interesting. Instead, you defeat her in combat, and then Drebin tells you her backstory in a very unremarkable codec conversation. It's just a wasted opportunity, and the fact that all of this context is explained in a post-boss fight codec call just saps all energy from it. There's just not a lot for me to grab onto in these opening chapters from a storytelling perspective, although I'm compelled by the idea of Solid Snake himself being used as a sort of a weapon, so there is some potential for things to get more interesting from here. It does feel like things are building up, but so far, I'm really just not that into it. And that's where I stand after the first couple hours of Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots. I'll be sticking with this game because I have fond memories of it, and I know at least some of the places it's going to go next are worth the effort to get to. But I'm a little sad that I can't be as unabashedly positive about this game as I've been able to be for the other games in the Metal Gear series. Maybe things will change, maybe things will get better, so make sure you're subscribed so you see the second half of this video when I post it and find out if my feelings turn around. Thank you so much for watching.